Want more positivity in your life? Subscribe, turn on notifications, follow us, and all that techie stuff. We'd love to hear from you. Comment, share, or give us a thumbs up. We are grateful to have you hanging out with us at Matt Logan Speaks.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode. I was just thinking, I just had to, my guest, I had to say, how should I introduce you? And I didn't ask that as a rhetorical question, but so what came to mind is whenever you're actually in the place of serving other people, you do whatever it takes whenever it needs to happen. And Duane Quam, welcome here on a Sunday morning to record this episode of the podcast.
Well, I happen to be here. When I was a kid, I'd maybe still be doing chores.
Yeah, I grew up on the farm.
Yeah, lived most of my my young years till I graduated high school on a farm.
Okay, sure. So you are in politics, and obviously politics are just a really hot topic right now and things. And off camera, we were talking about just, reaching out to people and who's been responding and who's not been responding. But why don't you tell people real quick before we learn more about you, why did you get into politics?
Well, at that time, there were big deficits. And there was an open seat. It was trying to find someone that had an idea of numbers. It's not my money, so I had to be careful spending it. And had the values of southeastern Minnesota. The small farm communities that when something went wrong, you just worked together and did a solution. Couldn't find anyone. And so one day I looked in the mirror and says, well, you keep telling people you need to, and so then maybe you need to. So I stepped forward and was fortunate to be elected.
How long have you been in office?
10 years.
Okay, 10 years.
And I came in when there was a projected about a $6 billion deficit, and next year, there's about a $6 billion deficit. The difference is there were just a few $100,000 in a cash flow account when we worked on that. Now we've got over $2.5 billion in reserve. So it gives us a little bit of a cushion to protect key areas, but it's still not going to be a fun time.
Are you referring to like the lockdown and things that we've had that with the COVID that has created some of that projected deficit?
The loss, two things happen. One, you have loss of revenue. The other thing you have is increased costs. And when times are tough, there are problems. Government steps in and helps out.
Yeah.
Just like your neighbors coming together, if you had some problem, you got hurt, or there was a fire or something, and then hopefully quickly things turn around. I'd hoped that maybe the economy would be recovering quicker, as in open and running, but frankly, nationally the economy's recovered better than I thought. Locally, there are winners and losers, and I feel very sorry for like the restaurants and the other establishments, small businesses that have really been hit hard.
There has been a lot of businesses hit hard, and really, I think in most cases, South Dakota is about the only one that has been real stable, and they obviously have had a lot of their issues and things too, as far as the economy goes. But they've recovered very well. I think that goes to what I like to talk about: trust versus force. And it looked to me like in that state, the government came in and said, "Hey, we trust you. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. Now we're trusting the people to do what they need to do." What are some of the positive things that you think we've been 8 months into lockdowns, not complete lockdowns, but let me put it like this. Our governor here in Minnesota has had emergency powers for 7 or 8 months. What are some of the positive things out of having that kind of power and control in that length of time?
Speed of action. In an emergency, you want to respond. That's why they did it. They said,
in the first place,
if there's a flood or tornado or some emergency, you need to be able to respond. And, that's quite reasonable. So, quick response. Not all the responses were maybe looking back the best or the optimal, but you never do. I mean, you can't expect going into somewhat of an unknown to make all the best decisions. But I think reasonable actions were taken. Looking back, we will probably in the future have authorization for emergency purchase of PPE or emergency equipment. Things like that are something to have available. I hate going back and saying would have, should have, could have, because you don't know at the time. Now we know something, we can probably do a better job of setting things up next time.
So that's the positive. That's a good way to look at it. I appreciate that. Because you do, at the beginning, no one really knew what it was, or certainly they weren't saying they knew what it was and things like that. But you do have to react, I guess, unfortunately. But what about, I imagine you want to be pretty careful with this, but what about kind of the negative side of that? I mean, having one person have emergency powers for such a long time in a state the size of Minnesota, is that wise?
Frankly, after a few weeks, the legislature, we were in session at the time. Mm-hmm. We easily could have set stuff up to allow for what needed to be done, but get away from the emergency powers. There were several bills put forward, and leadership in one chamber resisted that. No person is perfect.
Yes.
No person's judgment is universally right. And part of the reason you have the legislature is you bring voices from across the state. And, one versus 202 voices talking, debating. Obviously, I think discussion would have helped. The legislative process would have helped. It's slower, but not 7 months slow.
Yeah. That seems to me from where I'm sitting. Here's why I think it seems very unwise is because the narrative has changed so much. It's like, here's the goal. We're going to flatten the curve, in Minnesota. We're going to try to give, and that made sense, right? We're going to try to give the hospitals and all these different, PPE coming in and all these different things into place, right? That made sense at the beginning. But then the narrative changed, then we're looking at hospitalizations. Well, hospitalizations went down, and then the narrative changed to, and I mean, please fact check me on this, people, but this is just purely conversation from memory. But then the narrative changed from that to, cases being lowered and all those things. How come we allow the narrative to change so much? What have you done? What does that look like on your end, right, when that narrative changes? Is there dialogue there with the governor?
Well, from time to time, we would have legislative briefings with MDH. And
briefings is not dialogue.
No, but we would be able to ask questions and get some answers and additional details. The same team at the U of M that worked on the modeling were the ones that several years ago did a study on quality of hospitals. And they said the first time around, Mayo, bad, poor quality. So I talked to the person who did the modeling, and I asked, what was the model? And it became evident quickly that he didn't have a factor for readmissions or complexity. Generally, a large portion of what Mayo sees for patients, they've been admitted once or twice. They've got a more complex or a more difficult case. So there was no factor to correct for that difficulty. So they went back and did some work and came out with a reasonable, thoughtful. And these models that were so doom and gloom, it was obvious that there were some factors maybe not taken into account, such as you're going to have treatments. Hospital stays are going to go, it's going to be fewer days, better results. And we've had that. I always thought the delay of, flatten the curve, give us time so Mayo and other people and groups can come forward with treatments and solutions, solve some of the issues and problems. Well, frankly, I think we did. There are some wonderful treatments Mayo has been involved with. And so now, frankly, if you're, you hear different numbers, below 30, below 50, et cetera. But
are you talking years of age?
Of age, you end up having the mortality rate being comparable or lower than the common flu. We didn't know, but we discovered pretty quick that if you were 70 and above and had other morbidity, there were some really high mortality rates.
Yeah.
And we could have done better. Some states didn't allow COVID-positive people to go into a long-term care facility.
Yeah.
And others did. For a while, Minnesota had the highest percent of people in long-term care facilities.
Have you heard the number that the overall deaths, I believe this was done towards the end of September. I don't think quite all the way through September, but the overall number of deaths in 2020 versus I think it was against 2018, 2019, we're in line, right? Like, in other words, COVID deaths haven't increased the number of deaths overall. Have you heard that number yet?
What I saw was data by state.
Okay.
And I think there were, at that time, only 4 states had a higher quantity of deaths. When they lumped together, flu, pneumonia, similar deaths, they actually were lower in the vast majority of states for total.
Mm-hmm.
And so either accounting-wise, when you give, I think it's a 20% additional funding if a hospital labels COVID as being the cause.
Which is proven. The CDC came out and they said that, they were, there was an article on it from the CDC that you would get more money if it was related to COVID.
And they had back with AIDS, when AIDS was an issue, they gave additional funding.
Yep.
And they discovered that there was a propensity to, label a patient before September. I think it was September 1st. Hospitals didn't have to have a positive test. They had to
symptom.
Right. They went by symptoms. So if you had bronchitis or the flu and had similar symptoms, you would automatically, be labeled.
So, from your perspective in where you're at with things, what are you going to do to really push forward and fight to get, frankly, some more freedoms back? Or at least dialogue. Can we hear some realities of what these numbers are and what they mean from our governor instead of the narrative changing? What are you going to do? I'm frustrated. I'm not going to lie. It's frustrating to me from where I sit because it's certainly affected me in a negative way.
Frankly, it's hard. The media, if there's something going on, they like, if it's scary, shocky, they lead with that because it gets people's attention. In an emergency, it's probably getting harder for the fear factor because it's been months and people are starting to say, well, haven't you learned anything yet? And people are also looking at, we have vulnerable people.
Yes.
We need to focus on protecting Sweden. They really didn't go the whole shutdown thing. They went, who's the most vulnerable? Let's address and protect and focus on that and allow the rest of society to move forward. South Dakota did a similar thing. I'm not sure because Wisconsin had emergency powers continue, but the legislature has to vote and have them continue. In Minnesota, it's different. As long as the governor wants to continue emergency powers, it does, unless the legislature votes both chambers to end it. And there's been an effort. We've had bills to say we'll keep these components of the executive orders, such as you haven't been able to renew your driver's license or do XYZ because things have been shut down. Well, we have a forgiveness for X amount of days, etc. PPE, authorizing purchase of and distribution of. So the key things that we need to keep going, at least 3 different occasions we've had bills to do that. But the leadership in the House, Speaker of the House, have fought because we did have to have a supermajority to suspend rules to take up the bill to address it. The Senate has repeatedly passed things. But, it's a serious situation, and you have to keep that in mind, but we don't shut stuff down.
Yeah, it's a serious situation on both sides of that coin.
Yeah.
It's certainly after this many months, it's a very dangerous situation on both sides of the coin because suicides are up. Things like that are...
The most tragic thing are when we got... You said you can't have elective procedures, Children weren't getting the regular exams. People weren't getting regular exams.
Yep.
I've heard that 40% of the diagnosed cancers and other severe conditions haven't been diagnosed for months.
Yeah.
So early diagnosis, the prognosis is good.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got a great medical community, but if it's delayed a half a year, it's progressed. And, what about the quality of life and the deaths caused by, the shutdowns? We've opened up some, but the hospitals are still not, I think, fully back to normal. Early on, there was a proposal. Mayo has 2 hospitals. One, you could have done COVID. The other one,
Sure,
keep those other procedures.
Yeah.
And you said, suicides, adolescents and kids need that social interaction.
For sure.
When you isolate them, there are repercussions. And you see suicides, and you see those are things that are visible. What's scary is what is not.
Yeah, that is really scary because we also at this point know alcoholism is up. We also know that child abuse is up. All these things that are very, very horrible things are on the rise. It doesn't seem like, because of the lack of dialogue, it doesn't seem like that's something that is it's not really considered from our leadership at the top of the state of Minnesota. What can be done? What can you do to help inform people? What can you do to have people understand the catastrophizing of media and things like that? What would be your advice?
Well, personally, listening and understanding the individual issues that have come up. Have a discussion. Like we're having now. But then it comes down to we write letters. We speak up when there's a committee meeting. We try to talk to media. But if people write letters to the editor, call into the radio shows, they make their voice heard, that's what's going to, if the public opinion is obvious that we need to modify the approach, then I think we will modify the approach. Maybe I do have, when I talk, it does have a different effect, but with what's going on now, we need people together to speak up and say, hey, in Minnesota, we're used to the psychological effects of a long winter.
Correct.
And any parents used to, you have a rainy weekend, the kids can't go outside and play. It's tough. Well, you stretch that out by months and months and months, and everybody should realize that there are consequences.
Yeah.
And how can we, I'm glad that we had football games.
Yeah.
We had volleyball games.
Well, that's...
We needed that community, that social interaction. People feel better.
For sure, but that, excuse me, but that just happened, right? That was voted against happening initially in the season and things like that. So these seniors in high school, they never get another shot at this. And mitigating risk is extremely important, and I understand that, but that's across the board. That's with COVID, that's with suicide, that's with alcoholism, that's with child abuse, that's with depression. Mitigating those things is what is enormously important. So I'm excited that they did that too, and for some of my nieces and nephews. So
the parents and the students voiced, they rose, their voices were heard, and part of it which helped is neighboring states. Mm-hmm. Look at the Big Ten. Oh, we can't, and several other conferences did. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I guess we will. And there's the fear, let's be cautious, but let us not be ruled by the fear. Minnesotans are smart. Mayo Clinic is smart. And those solutions are here now. So take the precautions, especially for vulnerable groups. Mm-hmm. But allow the groups where it's not, that much different than the flu. for those smaller groups.
As far as how it affects them.
And how it affects them, right. Be smart, but allow for life to continue. It's like the house plant. If you have it and it gets no sunshine, it withers and dies. And our youth need that sunshine of interaction and socialization to truly thrive.
Yeah. That's a really good way to put it, that sunshine, because that you can deal with the rainy weekends, but when it gets to be more than the weekends, especially with students, because we are accustomed to the long winters, but we've also done things like the sports and other things that mitigate that long winter and make it a little bit more enjoyable and fun for people. So let's wrap up. How would you like to wrap this up? Tell us more about you. Why, whatever. It's about you.
Well,
let's do it. Get on your soapbox. Yeah, you shouldn't have been doing those voices earlier when you were. So Duane was doing all kinds of fun voices to lighten exactly.
Yeah. Grandchildren are great.
Yeah, I agree. I have two of them.
And it makes you feel that laughter. And so you have a little bit of fun and interact. And just the sound of that laughter, it's almost like a medicine. But, growing up on a farm, I learned that if you didn't feel well, didn't matter. You had to go out and water and feed the cattle and do the chores and keep things going. So excuses don't get the job done. But my aptitudes are math and science, so I've got a couple of engineering, a couple of physics degrees, and I'm used to problem solving and finding out what are the weaknesses. Legislation, oftentimes, there's a great thing. The intents are there on both sides. But oftentimes going for the shiny, you forget about how do you make it work and how do you avoid unintended consequences. The unintended consequence of having COVID positive people go into long-term care facilities were tragic.
Yes.
But, until we knew, you didn't know to avoid. But that's why you need to have the debate. Everything starts by listening, then discussing, and then coming together with the action. And that's what government should do. And government should always be working with and serving the people and not dictating everything, because our country was founded on freedom and choice. And we need to remember that people are individuals. And to support that, we need options and choices, because the solution for one may be tragic for another. And I've always tried to be a person that looked at the what-ifs, the possibilities, and avoid problems, but also come up with solutions. So, a little bit of thoughtful, discussion is better than just allowing, the emergency powers, like you say, is one person. We're around to discuss and make things better. But it starts out with listening to people and talking with people. Yeah,
we're the government. The people, that's the way it was set up.
Power to the people.
Right, exactly. And that, I think, it feels like, and it looks like in a lot of cases, that's been lost in certainly this circumstance. And the division is frightening. So yeah, that listening, I appreciate that. Duane, hey, thanks man for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.